Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Janae Tibshirani and today I'm joined by Professor Siah Hwee Ang for one of our double shot interviews. Siah holds the BNZ Chair in Business in Asia at Victoria University. Welcome, Siah.
Thank you.
Look, firstly, I'd just like to talk about the Overseas Investment Office. It seems to have made headlines again, but this time due to the way it's gone about giving a man in China permission to buy a lifestyle block in northern Auckland. So in this particular case, there's been a few factors which I've found quite interesting. Firstly, this man has bought the property for $8 million, while it was valued at just $2 million a year and a half ago. And secondly, he's fulfilled the criteria for, I guess, contributing to New Zealand by agreeing to give some local schools scholarships and also employing a full-time caretaker to look after the grounds. I mean, What are your thoughts on this? It seems like the government's just trying to get the taker or the best bidder who's going to get the best deal before it parts with land. What do you think?
Now, in terms of the 8 million for 2 million, I think that is something that we would normally expect of rich Chinese investors, right? They will just pay their way through the system to come here, right? So I don't think so-called fair market value, actually works for them. But in terms of that extra things about all these other donations, I think in some ways we've got to be careful there, right? I mean, how much is considered enough as a contribution to the country, right? For example, I mean, is say $50,000 worth of scholarship or $20,000 worth of scholarship enough, or is it just one of those things whereby you say, okay, this is just again a cash transaction as opposed to commitment? Right, so the sort of in some ways the government actually needs to have a certain much better open criteria, right? It's not about trying to, get small pots of money as a demonstration of the fact that they are actually committed to this country, right? It's not about just contribution, but in terms of commitment as well. It's not about, whether they have money, but if money can solve all the problems, then why bother to ask them to use the money to pay for the scholarship and solve the problem itself, right? Just ask them for cash.
Well, because it's confusing, isn't it? Say I'm in China, I just want to buy a holiday home here on some sensitive land or whatever. Then how do I know how many scholarships do I need to give away, or what type of other setup or environmental thing do I need to do? It creates confusion, doesn't it?
Right, correct. Yep. So it's not. I mean, sometimes you got to ask the question, right? So if you give out a scholarship, it's good, in some ways, because maybe that is a character that is very well known worldwide or a very well known Kiwi, so you have the so-and-so scholarship kind of arrangements, right? But you don't want to be taking any scholarship and start portraying, right? And then basically, when everything that comes with a scholarship has a certain reputation to it, we also don't want to start taking out scholarships for the sake of taking out scholarships because somebody has the cash.
Sure. Another case which I've been looking at recently was the Overseas Investment Office, or the government, I guess, as a whole, the way it handled the Shanghai Pynchon case, and what was it, Asia Business Summit that I was at a couple of weeks ago. The director of the company, Terry Lee, he spoke out quite strongly about the way the government handled this, in the sense that it took 14 months for it to come to a conclusion that it wouldn't be granted consent to buy the Lochinver station. What do you think, what type of fallout has that created in China about the way the New Zealand government treats investors?
Now, my take of the situation is that I actually don't understand what is going on inside there that takes 14 months. Maybe it's a kind of sort of back and forth process whereby they say, okay, can you tell me what is in it for New Zealand and so on. So there may be a lot of questions about this that has been floating around. But I think, we have to understand a lot of Asian countries in particular, they work at a very fast pace, right? So for them, they really need to get things done, let's say in a month or two, right? It's very, very difficult to tell them about the fact that they have to wait for more than a year, right, to get a bad decision, right? Good decisions are good, of course, after a year, right? Good decisions all have to wait. But bad decisions always is going to turn bad, especially after 1.5 years. And it's no surprise that they quickly turn around and do other things straight away. And that's the kind of answer that they want, right? So I think, again, we have to have certain criteria to which we say, look, if this is not enough evidence that this these folks are bringing in certain kind of benefits to us, then just say no from day one. Right, you don't have to go back and say, let's negotiate. Can you give me even more details? By having that negotiation, right, you are basically giving people the impression that there's hope, right? And when there's hope, then you don't want to start delaying for 14 months. So I think the procedures and the processes needs to be changed and streamlined in a way that the decisions are a bit more cutthroat, right? Both ways, either way. Now, in terms of that impact from it, right? The danger there again, right, is that if the process has been a bit more cutthroat, so even if the decision has been a no after 2 months, it would have been less problematic, because right now of course the story around this is that, you know, these guys are playing and delaying the process and yet say no. I mean, and from the Asians' perspective, that is a long process. Now, it's the long process that starts to kill investors, because these guys are very, very entrepreneurial and, you know, out there, and they want to come and they need to make it fast, right? So a lot of big companies like Baidu and all these other companies, they make major acquisitions of a few $100 million to a couple of $1 billion within a couple of weeks, right? And that's the kind of pace that we are talking about. It's not about 14 months later you get an answer saying, oh, no, sorry, that's too bad, right?
How does the system in New Zealand compare internationally, say, to America, Australia, Canada, other sorts of places which they might be looking to invest?
No, I think our system potentially is a bit tighter, because we are always, you know, trying to be a bit more consultative and trying to be, and our pace is honestly a much slower pace, right? But we have to understand, we have to meet them halfway, basically. I think investors are generally impatient, right? And they have the money, they want to do it now, and it's heavily lost opportunity in my view, right? It's the same as saying, you know, for people or individuals or organizations that deals with currencies and stock markets, you know, they go by the minute, they go by the seconds, they don't really go by the days, right? Now, for these guys, it's the same. The investors, they are here to try to invest, and every month they lose opportunities as a result of waiting for this. So I think from our perspective, we need to improve the process. But I think once the process is improved, it will be easy enough to, you know, sort of publicize to the fact that the process is improved, and, you know, there shouldn't be any more further concerns about this. Because I think it's the process that is the problem, it's not the decision that was the issue there.
So in terms of solutions, perhaps a better criteria for what they need to meet.
Yes.
Do you think as well it's a resourcing issue in the Overseas Investment Office?
Potentially, but I don't know exactly, you know, how many people have to go through as part of the procedures, how many people were involved, right? But perhaps, like you say, you know, clean criteria is straight enough that if you submit something that is not there, you reject, right? And then you have to resubmit again. I think that's fair. So instead of you have an application that looks like this, I mean, it might be difficult for immigration because there are just too many cases like that. But for big investments like this, it's always easy to say, if the documents are all not there, can you resubmit again, right? So the process get restarted so that the waiting time is not there. Otherwise, it becomes a waiting time back and forth, and people are not really giving the right documentation. And it always gives the impression that if I give the right documentation, I will get accepted. You see, over time, that's where the impression thing becomes very, very difficult to manage, and that's why I think maybe they were quite upset about it.
Sure. Hey, look, I just wanted to talk about the residential property market here in Auckland particularly. There seems to be anecdotal evidence that Chinese investors are pulling back from the market a little bit. To what extent do you think this is due to the new bright line testing laws that have come into place, which basically tax people who on sale after 2 years?
I think it's a very good policy, and I think, you know, slow down would be quite normal, because I would totally agree that quite a few people that I know of coming out from China actually buy quite a few here, right, in Auckland, so no surprise there, right? So I think the sort of this, maybe it's not the perfect sort of way, maybe there are other better mechanisms to deter this kind of speculation, but at the same time I think this one at least stops a bit. Right, and that's why I think there's also slight price adjustments, which is a bit, fairer, because otherwise the kind of jump that we are experiencing in the property price is just a bit too much. It feels like there's going to be a bubble, but it's never going to be a bubble, because the demand and supply is actually not aligned, and so on and so forth. So it's quite in a very sort of unstable state.
Do you see interest picking up again from Chinese investors once the new law settles in? Each time there's change, I guess it's a bit of instability. Do you see that picking up again after a year or so once this new law becomes more entrenched?
Yeah, it will always be the same. And for any regulation change, there's always a period whereby people just try to make sense of what is this for and whether it affects them and whether it affects the sort of the, for example, taking money out if you need rainy day money, right? So sometimes people just put all the money to buy properties and doesn't want to reach a situation whereby they actually don't get anything out of the property at all, right? Then we are better off saying keep the money in the bank, right? And then that's where, like you say, there will be a period whereby it's going to be quiet.
Sure. Look, Siah, just onto something completely different. This week, the IMF has included the yuan in its basket of reserve currencies. What does this mean for China?
I think in terms of from the Chinese perspective, right, I think is sort of, yes, it's a great idea, but it's like a concern, right? Okay, now to start with, right, in order to be included as part of the reserved currency basket, they have to be portraying that they are more market oriented. The currency is more open, right, subjected to current fluctuations. But as we all know, the Chinese economy and everything Chinese alike is all planned market oriented, right? So basically, it's not just market orientation, it's not a free market flow kind of thing, but it's planned within a certain bandwidth, right? So you have the same situation whereby you start thinking, right, if a country has been contributing to about 28% of the world's GDP growth in the last, few years or even more than a decade, you expect them to believe that this is just a recognition of their contribution, right, to the world's development and growth, right? So in some ways it's expected and it's a good thing and they will feel good about it. On the other hand, of course, when you start to have to be part of these baskets, you'll be affected, right, by the other baskets at the same time, the other currencies in the same basket. Now, my understanding is that they are representing about 10.9% of the basket, and everyone is given about 10 months, right, or 11 months to try to work it out, because officially that will only happen next October.
Do you think, how much confidence do you have in the People's Bank of China saying that now that the yuan is in this basket, I guess it won't interfere too much, it'll take a more hands-off approach? Do you have confidence in it saying that?
Hands-off is hard,
yeah,
right? Hands-off is hard unless they keep printing money to suppress it, right? It's always, we go back to the same accusation that sometimes you hear from the US saying that, hey, I think the sort of the yuan is actually not at its right value, right, undervalued, so it should be more expensive, right? And then, of course, the IMF would jump in at some stage late last year and say, look, I think that's at, the yuan value at this point is quite appropriate, right? Okay, so that's good. But at the same time, you start thinking, right, for economy like this, we have seen quite a few things that China has been doing in terms of trying to be a bit market-oriented. For example, recently with their capital market. But guess what happened, right? In the end, the whole thing collapsed, right? Because the scale of it just makes it so difficult to manage without managing it, right? Just letting market flow is not that straightforward as well. And with the yuan internationalized in terms of the number of clearinghouse around the world, I'm sure they will be trying to do a bit of the managed, planned approach as opposed to saying, look, let loose. Right? And it will be very, very brave of them to do it, because we've seen the yuan come down quite significantly, affecting everyone else in the world. And I suspect that the only way it won't be badly affected in some ways is that nobody wins, right? When that starts to slide or that starts to appreciate, nobody will know the impact of movement up and down of the yuan in a very free-flow market, because the world is being affected in both ways, both developed and the emerging markets.
Sure. Well, it'd be interesting to watch the space and see how it goes over the next 10 months or so.
Yes, but I think China has got its wish that they are recognized for this. But even going through Chinese media, it's obvious that they don't think, a lot of people within China is not even sure where this will go.
Well, Siah, that's probably a good place to leave it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I'm Janae Tibbs-Shirani. I'm joined by Siah Hwee Ang here at interest.co.nz.